Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our December briefing. This is an opportunity for me to introduce all of you to the larger team that we have now under Clearwater. And as you see Clearwater, CynergisTek, and TechLock all identified up there on the slide. The integration of these three companies is well underway and going very well. In January of next year, as we return with our cyber briefing series, we hope to incorporate more speakers from all three organizations and to actually broaden the scope of the topics and ideas and discussion that we have to bring. This will all be part of the Clearwater education series, which they're very much committed to. You'll again see Andrew and Dave, which you're going to see again today, again, some more. But hopefully we'll have even some more speakers to introduce and to participate. So we look forward to that and being able to bring all of you some great topics and some great discussions. Lauren is doing a super job, as always, taking care of your CEU credits. So that you get credit for spending the time with us each month in these sessions that you can use for your professional certifications. And she's going to continue to do that as well. So hopefully making these things doubly beneficial for all of you that are here. So with that, Lauren, let's get started. Let's go to the next slide. So this obviously is our cyber update, and it is December. We've gotten through Thanksgiving and we're heading towards Christmas. Let's talk about December news. So, one of the things that keeps coming up in the research data that I'm reading on a regular basis is that we are, and I think everybody understands this, we are suffering from a lot of fatigue in the industry, meaning a lot of our cyber folks are day on, stay on. They're not getting a break because the threat is relentless, and the types of things that they're having to deal with are relentless. And increasing and becoming even more prevalent for them day in and day out. And the cyber criminals know this, and they're targeting that. They're looking for organizations that perhaps are beginning to miss things, and as a result of folks either not paying as close attention as they should, or being overly tired, or being distracted doing other things that they need to do as well. So just keep in mind that the way you approach your job every day is incredibly important, and it is tough. There's no doubt about it. But when you feel yourself feeling some of that, just remind yourself that that's exactly what the bad guys are hoping that we're going to do. Take our mind off the ball. There's a new vulnerability out there that's part of the Micadis MV720 system, which is deployed in a lot of different vehicles. It's a computerized system that allows the companies that use those systems to track those vehicles, track shipments, to monitor them, in some cases actually operate those vehicles remotely, etc. And hackers have once again found a way to hack those systems, allowing their ability to track shipments and to communicate that information to other criminal groups, or to cut fuel to emergency vehicles, or even to extort ransoms by disabling fleets due to those vulnerabilities. So again, just another example of the things that we're dealing with, and not just in healthcare, but across the board in terms of cyber. But this is one that obviously could affect us too, because it affects things like emergency fleets of ambulances, etc. Humans are still very much a part of our threat landscape, if you will, or our attack surface. Phishing attacks are certainly the most common type of prelude, if you will, to more damaging attacks, as we've seen and continue to see over and over again. And 82% of the breaches in business involve a human element, an error, successful social engineering, or something. So we need to continue to pay attention to the folks that are in our organizations and help them be as diligent as they can be, and paying attention to what they're doing and what they're seeing and experiencing, so that they can alert us and to potential issues. And last but not least, I've been talking about social media, and I worry about social media as a grandfather and and whatnot in terms of what goes on out there. Meta, which, as you know, is the company that was Facebook or owns Facebook, uncovered 400 malicious iOS and Android apps targeting mobile users' Facebook credentials. That's huge. 43% of those apps were photo editors. At 19% were business utility apps that unlock unknown features, for instance. So there are others as well. But the point is, is that everything that you see on that phone and everything that folks are looking at or being presented is and should be treated as suspect until you know otherwise. And we need to do a good job of teaching not only the folks that work in our organizations about these threats, but also the folks that are near and dear to us, our families, our loved ones, our elderly, and our children, because they too can be taken advantage of. Next slide. So, cyber events in November, last month's recap. Well, everybody heard about the massive Twitter data breach, which is ongoing. Apparently, it's now gotten more attention and may actually be bigger than was initially reported. There's now evidence of multiple hacker groups being involved and having different lists of users' data, which means that now it may be larger than 5.4 million potentially. And there's at least one list of suspended users that is now moving around through criminal groups or criminal circles, if you will, on the dark web. So, if you have a Twitter account, if you haven't changed your password, you should have already, but if you haven't, you should do it now. Make sure that you put additional security on that account, and maybe rethink what you put in Twitter. Unit 221B is a company that resides in New Jersey. And this is a good example of where coordination with law enforcement is such a smart idea. And having a close relationship with the law enforcement folks in your area that can help you in the case of an incident. In this case, these folks have been helping the victims that were hit by the Zeppelin ransomware 2 years ago. And actually, in 2 years ago, they actually notified law enforcement agencies that they had the code that allowed them to decrypt the Zeppelin ransomware data. And yet there's still companies out there that they're still learning about today that are still trying to decrypt the data from that attack. And it's because people are afraid to call law enforcement or don't think to call law enforcement. But you need to do that because sometimes law enforcement is aware of things that can help you, that can get you through this process much quicker. And in this case, if somebody had been hit by that ransomware and had called law enforcement up to 2 years ago, they would have been told, "Hey, here's a resource that you can use to decrypt your data." November 8th of this month, Microsoft released a security update to fix some problems that were out there. An exploit that has been around since September, according to researchers, and has been successfully exploited. Takes advantage of common fakes that are created in TeamViewer, AnyDesk, Adobe Flash, Zoom, and lately Google Ads to distribute malware. Again, this is just and I know Dave's going to talk about this, and it's been part of our discussion today. The topic is really about, are you taking care of the things that you know? Are you eliminating the common risks that frankly shouldn't be out there because you're doing the right things? And in this case, are you patching? And I know we've been talking about patching since I was a young person in this career field, almost 30, 40 years ago now. But we're still talking about patching. And this is another example of it. Anybody gets hit with this particular variant of attack, shouldn't, because they should have already patched their systems. The question is, has everybody done it? Next slide. Okay, we can't see this guy. I'm assuming this is the Grinch, but it is the holidays. We've just been through Thanksgiving. We've just been through all of the big shopping days after Thanksgiving and over the weekend. We're still into a lot of that with a lot of the companies that are out there. I know I've been bombarded by all kinds of companies wanting to sell me things and all kinds of messages. And I've seen all kinds of phishing messages in the last couple of weeks and whatnot. And everybody else should be seeing this stuff again. Again, this time of year, it is just rampant, and everybody needs to be paying attention to it. You need to talk to your family members about it again. This is another one of those things where you should be talking to the elderly in your family and the youngsters in your family that have smart devices, and make sure that everybody's being careful. That they stop, they read things if they didn't ask for it, that they question it, that they go directly to the site themselves and the official site, that they're checking your devices, making sure that the things that you're using and the people that you're interacting with to make transactions are indeed safe for you to use. This time of year, fraud's number one, and credential harvesting is number two, and ransomware is number three. So don't be the victim of one of the big three. Pay particular attention and be really careful as we head into the Christmas season. Next slide. All right. So today we're going to be talking about things that threats that hide in plain sight, the things that are out there that frankly we should be dealing with almost as an afterthought. And I'm going to use Chesty again as my example of this. And oftentimes the way you make yourself stronger is you eliminate the risks that you know about, so that the number of risks that the enemy can take advantage of are fewer. And in this case, one of the things that every Marine officer, including myself, had to read numerous times was Sun Tzu's teachings on the art of war. And one of the lessons in there is to know your enemy. The other corollary to that is to know yourself. But Chesty was a battle-hardened commander, and he had been through the Second World War before he ended up in Korea. And so he was smart about that. He knew the Chinese and the Korean forces he was facing. He knew their tactics and their weapons. He knew the way how they would come at him. He knew what his weaknesses were, and he knew his current condition, and he knew their current condition. So he knew where the things were that he needed to address. He knew that his Marines were tired, and he knew that and cold, and he knew that the Chinese and the Koreans were just as tired and just as cold, because that war had grinded on for quite a while at this point. But he also knew that they were overconfident because they were numerically superior. You had 5 Chinese divisions surrounding one single Marine regiment. And the Chinese, I'm sure, were sitting there waiting, expecting the Marines to get colder and tireder and run out of fuel and run out of ammunition and be easy picking, so to speak, right? This was going to be an easy battle. But Chesty and the Marines had a different outcome in mind, because they knew that if they sat there and continued to be in a defensive posture, that's exactly what was going to happen. So they took the advantage away from the attacker. They eliminated all the things that they knew that the attacker could potentially do to them, or the attacker could potentially take advantage of, which narrowed down the things then that they had to deal with and push through. And that's how they survived. You need to do that as well in your environment. Eliminate all the things that you can know about to make it harder for the attacker to find that weakness that they can take advantage of or exploit to make your program stronger. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave and Andrew, who are going to do their thing and have a great time.
Well, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Glad I could be here today. When we talked about this conversation, and you look at the nice title, threat on a shelf, what's hiding in plain sight. Go ahead, next slide, Lauren. Couple things I want to focus the conversation on today, and really to talk about what the conversation is not about. And as we look at, to kind of add to what Mac just said, there are known unknowns that are out there. Like, there are some things that we do not know, and our conversation isn't to try to pull out what we don't know yet. The second thing is there are unknown unknowns. and there's things that we don't know that what we don't know. And, once again, the conversation, we're not going to focus on that. What we're going to try to focus on and hopefully help everyone avoid are the unknown knowns. And what we mean by that is this is something that it's hiding in plain sight. We should know about them. And these are things that we can take care of to help mitigate risk. I think the unknown knowns are, the hardest thing from a risk management perspective. Like we as leaders, as cybersecurity professionals, as business owners, it's important that we are able to identify the risks in our organization. What are the threats? What are the things that can cause, grave impact to us, and putting the things in place to minimize the unknown knowns that are out there. So with that said, and we talk about, threats that are hiding in plain sight, today I'm going to touch on, what the adversarial threat is and things, where are they having success? What are the knowns? Things like data breach and loss, the extortion that is happening, the destruction that is happening, and hopefully the minimizing, potential life safety when it comes to care delivery organizations. We certainly know that these threats that are hiding in plain sight have potential grave financial impacts. There's certainly business impacts to an organization that has to deal with a cyber attack, both from legal liability, regulatory, and just business operations, and ultimately that can lead to reputational and long-lasting impacts. So I think there's so many statistics out there that talk about what a data breach costs today, and I think it's extremely difficult in this world to understand maybe some of the true impacts that a breach can have. As we look in the news and see health systems that have been down for weeks and what their monthly revenue loss is based upon those those downtimes, it'll be interesting to see how those systems can recover. So how is this all happening? Certainly, I still think the primary thing that needs to be focused on is the things inside of our organization, the insider. Most of the way that organizations get impacted by cyber today, it all starts with the people. It's people are the biggest part of the attack surface. Go ahead, next slide. And one more. All right, some things by the numbers. So what do we know? And we can kind of go into then how to take what we know and maybe talk about some focus areas to help address those. I just wanted to provide some numbers that I found really alarming and interesting when you think about it. If you go into threat intelligence sources, I looked at the vulnerability tracking that Mandy and Threat Intelligence Platform had, and there are 96,000 vulnerabilities that are tracked in their database. CISA in their tracking they can track what is known exploited. So 857 vulnerabilities with known exploits. So these ones that they know from attacks that have occurred have been exploited. We also know recently CISA and HHS put out a notice in July of this past year that really wanted to focus healthcare on web applications. If you look at over 70% of the hacking actions as far as incidents are taking place through some type of web application, web service. And we also know, once again, alarming statistics, and we've talked about this before in depth, is around your third party, your supply chain risk. 62% of the breaches that were reported in the Verizon DBIR involved some third party. I want to highlight something that Max said in the beginning of this conversation. My first exposure to cybersecurity was back in the mid 90s during the "I love you" bug when I was in the Air Force, and I think one of the things that was new to everyone was a stop everything that you're doing and go patch as many things as you possibly can to minimize the impacts to the I love you bug that occurred. We're now in 2022, more than 20 years later than that. And I think if you go to every recommendation that comes out of a security incident, anybody that produces information on an indicator of compromise or talks about a threat that is out there, usually the first thing that is told as the recommendation is to patch something. So it's extremely important that we provide focus areas on what we know and try to avoid those unknown knowns. Go ahead, next slide. All right, a little bit on the web application attacks. Certainly, we know that what is the what we provide information, service delivery, business functions through web services. And if you look at what the threat actors today are focused on, if you look at the malware families, if you look at what is the ultimate goal, generally is the financial gain. How do they do that? They do it by what's exposed. What do they have the ability to go and attack? What is a part of the attack surface? Well, they can see web services and they can attack people. And by attacking the web services and attacking the people, they can gain credentials. They can then, with those credentials, look for vulnerabilities that are on your networks and in your environments, and they can exploit those vulnerabilities. Most of these groups are cyber criminals that are financially motivated, and they run their organizations as enterprises. And certainly we see that a majority of the types of attacks out there and the types of malware families that are there are all focused on web applications and web services. Go ahead, next slide. So who are the threat actors? Well, as of December, there were 101 known. So once again, we'll go back to what do we know? There's 101 known threat actors that are targeting the U.S. healthcare industry. Healthcare ranks above energy and utilities and aerospace and defense in at least the number of threat actors that are targeting the industry. They're targeting this industry because they're having success, and it is certainly, as we look over the last 18 months to 24 months, something that if we're not taking seriously now, we really need to take seriously. I think we've talked about in these series over the last several months, a heightened awareness and, what is happening around us? What are the knowns that are happening around us? Well, the knowns that are happening around us are we have a very highly motivated, financially motivated group of actors that are having success extorting the healthcare industry for money. That is what's happening. So go ahead, next slide. How are they doing it? Well, the top malware families are really designed to help steal your credentials. They do it through different types of web services, different types of capabilities, ultimately to steal your credentials. It's really important to note that every person in your organization is a part of the attack surface. When you look at, what are we supposed to protect? Well, we need to protect our people. We need to protect our patients, our assets, our business partners, our information, and in some cases, our investors, the public, maintain public trust. It's important to recognize that everyone is a part of that attack surface. It doesn't matter who you are in an organization, what your role in the organization. If you are a part of that organization and you're there to help that organization succeed, you are part of that attack surface. And to the threat actor, to be able to distinguish between what your personal and professional identity is actually quite gray in this world. Now that, certainly most everyone, I only know of a few people that are truly off the grid. And I have some folks in my former life that do their best to stay off the grid, minimize their footprint. And I think in today's professional world, certainly in what we do, it's extremely difficult to differentiate between what our personal profiles and exposure on the internet is, as well as our professional identity. And, exposures on both sides can certainly impact your personal life as well as professional life. So it's really important to ensure for everyone, not only do we need to be aware of education and training on, best practices around what we need to do for our organizations, but also things to make sure that, we're not using our professional credentials for personal use, or we're practicing, really good, cyber hygiene when it comes to our personal lives. And then to add that, as we all know, everything is getting connected to the internet. So we know that that attack surface is now not just our traditional, what we consider to be people and computers and laptops and phones, that everything is connected, and the types of devices all make up that attack surface, and all make capable targets for those threat actors. Next slide. I'm not going to talk a lot about supply chain risk, but as we look at the attack surface and we look at what's being targeted, we have to put just as much risk emphasis on our supply chain, knowing who our vendors are, how are we maintaining the things that we need in order to conduct our business, and what are the impacts to that. Go ahead, next slide. So how the threat actors attacking? Well, the first thing and foremost, they target. They're going to target you. That is the first and foremost. They're going to target you, and once they target you and are successful at that, part of that attack surface, they're going to take advantage of your weakness. And the way they do that is by looking at those 96,000 vulnerabilities that are tracked, and seeing what vulnerabilities they can exploit. And once they can exploit them, they get on your network, and that's where they hide in plain sight. And ultimately, they want to be able to hide long enough to look for the valuable information. Once they get it, they strike and they extort. That's really the path that they're taking. And to minimize some of the unknown knowns, we can really focus on the first two bubbles there. Those are things that we can focus on. We can focus on how to minimize what they target, and we can minimize what they can take advantage of from a weakness standpoint. Go ahead, next slide. So how do we do that? Here's some focus areas that we can to address those things in plain sight. You cannot protect what you don't know. Identify everything, track everything, manage everything. You cannot protect what you don't know. And as we look at what we have all interconnected in our organizations, make sure that we have visibility. It's really important that we maintain visibility. Once we have visibility, we need to implement robust vulnerability management. You need to look for vulnerabilities, find them, and remediate them and mitigate them as quickly as possible, to ensure that threat actor cannot take advantage of that. And once we have everything that we need to protect, and we know it's in a good state, we must continually assess risk in our environment. It's an ongoing process. It doesn't stop. It shouldn't be a snapshot in time. It should be a continual process. We know right now the primary threat vector are people. That's where they start. That's how they target. That's how they get in. We cannot train and educate our folks enough, and we cannot focus enough control around ensuring that we have things like multi-factor authentication, privileged access management. These are things that, if we have in place, can minimize those financial impacts to our organization. Not only maybe help us lessen our cyber insurance premiums, but really just put us in a better risk posture. The threat actors won't hide in your network undetected if there's good monitoring and there's good multi-factor and limited privileged access to that. And then lastly, knowing that, what a big part of our business success, we rely upon vendors. It's a huge part of our business success. And we really want to make sure that we understand, what the business impacts are to our supply chain and to our vendors. Are we conducting the right level of risk, and are they included in a life cycle management approach? So where we understand the changes they're making and the impacts that's going to have on our environment. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Andrew, and so he can continue this conversation about patient privacy.
Thanks, Dave, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Mahler. I'm the Vice President of Privacy and Compliance here. Really happy to be speaking with you today, and really what I'm going to focus in on is some of the threats to patient privacy or data privacy. And even before I start, I think it's worth emphasizing something that Mac mentioned earlier related to the Metapixel incident. What we're seeing is that these sorts of investigations are continuing to go on. I know that there are a number of consumer groups and media outlets that are looking at telehealth sites. They're looking at hospital sites. They're really digging into the details. And I think really what this emphasizes is, first of all, not only taking care of the things that are in plain sight, making sure that you do have a sense of who's in your systems, who's having access to data, because that gives you the opportunity then to hone in on some of these more complex and new issues that are popping up. And at the same time, now that we know that this information is out there, now that we know that people are paying close attention to some of the tracking scripts, and especially in some of the scheduling sites, really wanted to emphasize and underscore the importance of making sure that somebody within the organization is really asking some questions about what scripts are in place, when they're turned on and when they're turned off, and again, just really underscoring what we're here to talk about today, which is focusing on the things that are in plain sight and addressing them. Next slide, please. When you look at HIPAA, you really have two different defined terms. You have uses and you have disclosures of data. I've sort of added a third here to make it a little more complicated, and to draw out some of the complexity that happens when we're talking about accessing different types of data. So when we think about improper access, I'm thinking, who has access to what? I'm thinking, are we monitoring the access to data? And some examples here, obviously outsiders, could be intruders, it could be third parties, it could just be individuals within the organization who don't need or require access to data. Improper uses, some questions that we want to be asking here is how's health information being used, shared, or discussed, even within the organization? So some examples here that they're not bad things in and of themselves, but we've seen a lot of situations where it can quickly go awry. Using health information for marketing purposes, using health information for research purposes. If those two items in particular are not being properly addressed through policy, process, and training, you've got a lot of opportunities for risk there. And then especially employee snooping, which I'll dive into in just a minute. And then the third type, improper disclosures, who obtains or sees health information outside of your organization. So, are we selling information? Are we giving information to the media? Are we giving information to third parties or even potentially law enforcement in ways that aren't permitted? And the reason why it's important to be thinking about this is because if you think about these three, and as we talk through this presentation today, it's vital that we're thinking about, not just the access to data, but the oversight of data. And I think really in order to understand what proper oversight looks like, we really need to understand what access means, what use means, and what disclosures mean, because they can really take on several different elements and definitions. Next slide, please. So some numbers here just to give us some context for how we're reviewing access to health information. What we know, and you've probably heard me say this before, well over half of all OCR resolution agreements, we went back to 2019, but honestly, it goes back even further, found potential violations of requirements directly related to access monitoring. And when we think about access monitoring in this case, we're thinking about not just the third parties and outsiders who are accessing data, but even people inside the organization who are accessing data. Another reason why this is important is that, as you might guess, it's not that 50% of all OCR resolution agreements focused in on monitoring or auditing. They more than likely focused on other areas, and the complaints and the investigations really started with other types of security or privacy incidents, but they found violations of user access monitoring and auditing within virtually over half of those resolution agreements. Almost $1 million. This was earlier this year. We have a resolution agreement. We've got an organization failure to implement audit controls. We know this is still a focus of OCR, and it's certainly something that they're interested in making sure organizations are tuned into. We went back and looked at some of the alerts that resulted in disciplinary action across our clients, and what we found is that the top 3 alerts, same household, so people within the same address, user self-access, so people accessing their own record in a way that may not be permitted under policy, and then same last name, so looking at people that you're related to or you may have been related to. And really what this shows us is that we have an issue with people inside our organization who are either, they don't have the right training, they don't have the right policies and procedures that they can access, or they're just doing something that presents a huge risk, not just to the organization, but also to patients. And then finally, this is some good news. We looked at a couple different clients, and we looked at one in particular, and what we found with this client was that even though the total number of users, so these are people accessing the medical record, even though the number of users grew almost 40% over about 1.5 years, the number of alerts decreased by 50%. When I say alerts here, I'm talking about those alerts and those flags that get pinged when there is some type of possible impermissible access to data. And the reason why there was a decrease is because this organization had been doing effective monitoring and auditing and review over those years. And so the workforce and the staff, they understood that they're being reviewed, their access is being monitored, they have the right training and education. And so we really saw the risk go down pretty substantially. And I'll share a bit more about that in just the next slide, Lauren. So what are some difficult truths here? And when you think about using that, using the academic medical center as an example here, we saw the users increase, we saw the alerts decrease. And one reason that I said earlier of why we're seeing that in this case is truly because of education and training. And I think it's really important that when we think about what education training means, we think about some really difficult truths. We know that it's in human nature to be curious. We're interested if somebody hasn't been to work in a long time. We're curious if somebody seems sick and they're not showing up, or we're curious about what happened in a recent accident that was in the news. We like to share information. Again, human nature. We like to gossip. It's addicting. If we find out something interesting about a coworker or a colleague or a patient, or even that we have a celebrity or a politician in our systems, we like to tell people about it. It's just in our nature. And then the last two are really connected. Health information is valuable, and the bottom line is people react to hardship and opportunities really differently. And so when you think about all of these things that really are difficult truths, the lesson here from my perspective isn't we shouldn't trust our colleagues, or we shouldn't trust the person working next door. The lesson here is that we have these human traits, this nature to ourselves, and it really needs to be addressed in a way that's managed across the organization to really help people know, hey, I might be curious, I might want to share information, but I know that my access is being monitored. I know that we have, I just had this training earlier this year where I was told that this is something I can't do. So I'm going to remember that. And I'm going to remember that if I do it, there's potential disciplinary action or sanctions that can be put in place. And I don't want to put myself and my family in that position. So I think it's helpful to really think about some of these difficult truths as you're thinking through what your risks are, particularly around, who's accessing data and how they're accessing data. And we'll see this in a couple case examples. Lauren, next slide, please. So the first study that I'm going to go into here is about the city of New Haven, and this goes back a couple years. This was an OCR resolution agreement, and the background of this case is that you've got an employee. She was terminated during her probationary period. She came back a week later. She went into her old office. She used her old office key. She then went to her desk, used her credentials, and she downloaded information of hundreds of patients onto a USB drive. Now, you can see here there's several different failures that happened. And I'll hone in on one of them, but there's several. So the first here, we've got a physical control issue, right? We have somebody coming back using a key. We also have an HR issue. We have an access issue where, somebody that had been terminated still had credentials, still could access data, still could log into her computer even a week later. We also have a third issue, which is that, had the city of New Haven had certain types of monitoring and auditing processes in place, my perspective is that they could have caught this much earlier than they did. The reason they caught this was through an investigation that they were doing subsequently, but had there been some type of monitoring and auditing program in place, it would have been very likely the organization would have said, or the platform or the person doing the review or auditing would have said, well, hold on, there's a flag here because we've got somebody that was terminated logging back into their computer and accessing our EHR. What's going on here? And then we can address it in a way that's proactive as opposed to reactive. So what did OCR find? Of course, city impermissibly disclosed hundreds of individuals' PHI, and they failed to implement procedures, not just for terminating access, but also for monitoring and auditing, how that process happens across the organization. The costs here aren't substantial. They are substantial. We're looking at over $200,000 just paid to OCR. That doesn't include any of the operational costs that go into staffing and helping to fulfill the corrective action plan, which was pretty lengthy and substantial. And then lots of other costs. I mean, the costs of mailing, the notification to individuals, the potential cost of litigation, the cost of setting up better systems and processes. So there are a lot of costs that went into this that probably could have been prevented had there been certain controls in place. And my hope is that we can use these case studies as some examples to us and as we're thinking through our risk profile. Next slide, please. The second case study, this is a health insurer, a very large insurer that operates in multiple states, multiple entities. This was last year, 2021. This one is another interesting one that really underscores the importance of knowing who's in your data. In this case, Lifetime reported a breach to OCR after they learned that cyber attackers gained access to systems. Well, in and of itself, I think we all understand this happens. This happens on a daily basis. We are constantly under attack, as you heard from Mac and Dave earlier. However, here's the interesting point. The incident, they learned the incident started sometime in December of 2013 and ended in 2015. So there were years here, in theory, where these cyber attackers had access to data. They installed malware. They conducted reconnaissance activities. So they were in there for a long time, doing a lot of bad things with that data and really thinking about what they could do with the data. This resulted in over 9 million individuals' privacy and medical records being compromised. And what OCR found in this case, they didn't have in place the requirement to implement procedures to regularly review records of activity review. They didn't have policies and procedures technical in nature that would allow access only to those people or programs that have been granted access rights. So we have here a situation. We've got a lengthy period of time where people are in systems doing things, and this very large entity didn't didn't know, didn't have the right controls in place to be able to identify this. This cost in this case over $5 million, very substantial. And what OCR found here, we've got to implement regular review of audit logs. This is part of the corrective action plan that followed. They had to put in place these technical controls that they didn't before. Again, costs associated with that, operationalizing it, bringing on FTEs and so forth. And then always think about the other costs, reputational cost, potential litigation costs, and so forth. So again, another example of something that I think we can use as a lesson moving forward, that really we want to emphasize the importance of knowing who's accessing our data, who's using our data, and where our data is going. Next slide, please. And finally, what do we do with all this information? My background is as a lawyer. I tend to like to ask lots of questions about things, and my particular perspective is that when you start asking difficult questions, you start diving deeper into issues, and you start learning how to solve those issues. So a few high-level questions that I think all organizations should be thinking about and asking. First of all, what assumptions are we making about insider threats? Are we just assuming that providing training once a year is sufficient to address some of those human nature issues that I talked about earlier? Are we making assumptions that nobody could possibly do anything wrong with data as long as they're an employee here, because all of our employees are trained and all of our employees are excellent? Well, it's an assumption there, and it could be a dangerous assumption if you're not supporting those employees by providing training policies and technology to help. Next question, how are you monitoring this kind of access and use of data? Are you monitoring, and how are you monitoring? Are you doing it manually? Are you doing it retroactively? Or are you doing it regularly? Are you doing this proactively so that in theory, had you been at the City of New Haven, had you been with Lifetime, a proactive approach, you may have been able to identify some of these things much earlier on. Who's responsible for this? Do you have people on point for not just looking at who's accessing data, but people on point for making sure people have education and policies, people on point for making sure disciplinary action is consistent across the organization and that it's fair? And then the final two bullets, what types of alerts are you reviewing? And those of you who are using platforms or technology to help with this, you'll know that there's really dozens of different types of flags, everything from, coworkers snooping on each other to VIPs being, VIPs or celebrities that are in the hospital or the clinic being treated, people living on the same street within the same household, and so forth. So it may be the case that you have such a robust office that you're able to review all of those alerts and you can turn all of them on. What we tend to find is that can be pretty overwhelming, right? There's a lot of information that comes once you're looking at all of the possible alerts that could populate. So, the next question, why are you only reviewing certain types of alerts, or why are you reviewing all the alerts? And is there a cadence here that can really help you better address the risk, not just the risk to the organization or the risk to patients, but the risk that, an employee or somebody that, you might have a really good relationship with, the risk that person might be in a position to access data in an improper way. So again, all of this to say, we have a lot of things that are hanging out in plain sight, and building off of what Mac and Dave talked about, I think it's just a good point to remind people that we have a lot of insider threats to deal with, and we have a lot of ways to accomplish minimizing the risk and providing the support that staff and employees need. So with that, I will turn it over to Lauren.
All right, thanks, Andrew. We will allow for about 5 minutes of Q&A. We did have an awesome question on some phishing new trends that Mac, I will let you address.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren. So we had one One question come in from one of our participants during the discussion, and the question was, have you heard of attackers emailing on white background in the smallest font and in white so that the recipient does not see the added language, but a computer can read it? So the first of all, this is not as, and Thomas Graham, who's one of our senior security engineers, provided the answer to this question while we were watching as well. And this is nothing new. This has been around for a while. It's a way of trying to spoof people in terms of email once again, and it's become a topic again here recently because people are using it to circumvent very common purposes and things such as one of the examples Andrew gave was circumventing the algorithms and resume submission boards. But the good news is that most of our modern spam filters will recognize when somebody has tried to do this and treat it as suspicious. So hopefully you're running appropriate up-to-date spam filters in your environment, and these things should get caught and should be treated in that manner. There are also things that you can do that in your email that will force that hidden language, if you will, to be highlighted. And I don't remember exactly what the settings are for doing that, but you can get somebody to help you figure that out. But there are things you can do to protect yourself against this kind of thing. But yeah, it's just, the attackers are always looking for unique or novel ways to get us to click on something inadvertently or accidentally that can cause a problem. Any other questions there, Lauren?
Not at this time. We can give a few minutes for folks in the audience to ask their questions in the Q&A tab or chat tab.
Okay. So apparently we have some while we're doing this in the questions and waiting for people to think of questions, apparently we have some breaking news from OCR about Metapixel. So Andrew, why don't you tell us about that?
Sure, very happy to. So, it's interesting. Right as I sort of signed off and turned it over to Lauren, I got a notification from OCR, and important reminder here: the Office for Civil Rights, they have a listserv. I highly recommend you sign up for it, and if you have trouble finding it, just feel free to reach out to us and we can help you. But OCR has just put out a pretty substantial guidance document around the Metapixel issue and tracking technologies. And I think really, this is something that will be coming through, and I think all of you should take an opportunity to look at it too when you can. But the interesting thing from my perspective is that this is something that has finally made it to OCR's radar, and they've been clearly spending a lot of time thinking about it. There's a lot of information about when these sort of tracking technologies could result in an incident or a breach, whether or not HIPAA applies to certain entities using certain types of tracking technologies. So we'll post this out, as our follow-up, but I wanted to make sure that, because that came out just now, you all have an opportunity to take a look at it or pass that along to somebody in your organization who would review these.
Yeah, that's real important. If you recall, I think it was either last month or month before last, I talked about the issue that's going on between Meta, Facebook, if you will, and the large hospital system, where they were basically sharing patient information with third-party brokers, marketing brokers, and they were doing that using Metapixels. The systems that they were using in order to grab that information and then to share it with those third-party marketing firms that then go out to others with that information uses the Metapixel. So this is real important. You should take a look at it. And any of you who are using social media like Facebook, for instance, in your systems for whatever you're doing, so that you understand better what this risk is and what the potential is for something to go sideways. So that's very timely, Andrew. Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay, we just had a question come in, Mac. When quantum computers become commercially available in the short near future, will it require us to change the way we encrypt our data? Is there any way any work being conducted to create quantum computing threat mitigation?
So the answer, that was a great question. And quantum computers are already upon us, so to speak. There is a document that you can get off of the CISA website. They put out guidance. CISA and NIST put out guidance last year in 2021 to everybody that said, here's what you need to do or need to be aware of and what you need to do with respect to quantum computing. And basically what they said was between now and 2023, you need to begin to take inventory of all of your systems and applications, et cetera, in your environment that utilize encryption to protect data. And you need to understand whether that is encryption that is added afterwards, meaning you use some other encryption tool to encrypt the data in the application, or whether it's encryption that's embedded in the application, because those are two different problem sets, if you will. But you need to have that inventory. And the second thing they said you needed to do was you needed to prioritize those data sources so that you knew which ones were most important and which ones you needed to address first. And then to understand that between 23 and 25, NIST has been given the guidance by the federal government to come up with the new encryption algorithm that people are going to have to apply in replacement of the ones that we have out there now, what's currently approved, and it replaced the ones that we have out there now to protect those data sources. Because once quantum computers become the mainstay, which they expect quantum computers to begin to arrive more frequently after 2025, and from 2025 to about 2030 to be the real adoption period, if you will, for quantum computing. And after 2030, they predict is going to be what they call the post-quantum computing period, meaning after 2030, quantum computing will be common. That basically all of the encryption that you have today will not stand up to a quantum computer. And that's what you need to understand. So now understand this too, that it's not black and white, because quantum computing and quantum computers are not going to be used for everything. There are some computing processes in your environment that will still run on a standard processor and not a quantum processor, and therefore will not be subject to this risk. But anything that is capable of running on a quantum computer will clearly be the encryption that it has today will be obviated once the quantum computing capability becomes real. And yes, the encryption that we have today will not stand up to a quantum computer. They're going to have to come up with a new algorithm that is stronger and that is capable of providing protection to a quantum computing brute force attack, if you will. And NIST is already working on that. But your part, and first thing you need to do is go to the CISA site and download that guidance. Second thing you need to do is begin that inventory process that I talked about, and understanding where your data is encrypted. Third part of that is the thing you need to do is to prioritize those assets, so that when you get to that period between 25 and 30, that you know what your work plan needs to look like in terms of which ones you need to fix first, meaning which ones that you need to apply the new algorithm to, which applications or systems that it's embedded in that are going to have to be upgraded or replaced. This is a big issue, and fortunately we have time to address it. But you should already be beginning that process at your organization in terms of planning for the future. Okay. Any other questions, Lauren?
There are not at this time, Mac. And just with the bit of time we have left, I'd like to take over and kind of discuss what's ahead for our cyber briefings in 2023. So really quickly, we are going to continue these sessions next year with the same dynamic format of providing a threat update followed by a focus session from our experts based off current events and trends. 2023's first session will be held Thursday, January 12th. After that session, we will return to our regular cadence of holding a cyber briefing on the first Thursday of every month. One change, we will be hosting the event via Zoom instead of this third-party platform. And good news, your current registration will automatically roll over into 2023. So if you're here today or registered already, you don't have to re-register. Stay tuned for more details coming via email, including CEU, CPE announcements. We will also be sending a follow-up survey that we encourage you to take to gather your feedback and improve our sessions going forward. If you have any cyber briefing specific questions or ideas, please feel free to email me or contact me directly. Shoot me an email at events@CynergisTek.com. Mac, I will pass it over to you for closing thoughts.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks Dave and Andrew for participating again today and recalling what I said at the beginning. As we're in the new format, as Lauren went through, is also going to include more speakers next year. So we're looking forward to that excitement, incorporating all of the Clearwater family in terms of the speaker pool, if you will, that can participate in these events. So hopefully we'll see all of you back in January, and hopefully we'll have some great conversations month after month. And Lauren will, of course, continue to make sure that you have your CEU credits associated with these events so that you continue to be able to use that to support your certifications, which are very important. I'm not sure whether I will be back in the new year, but I hope so. But if not, I want to wish all of you a great holiday with all of your family and friends and loved ones. I want to wish you most importantly a great new year and a very successful new year, and hopefully a very safe and secure new year. And I want to thank all of you for everything that you do for your organizations and for this industry, which is so important. And I want to encourage you to continue to fight the good fight because we absolutely need to continue to stay on our guard. So thank you very much. And as 2022 draws to a close, and hopefully 2023 brings a bright future for everybody that's here. Thank you very much.